Hello, everyone. So in this set of replay reviews, I'm going to go over the last three matches in the Fight Night of The Process versus NWE. It's going to be Chris Ferg versus the World here, and he's going to run a Tau and a Prison Design list against a nice variety of NWE corps. I'm going to try and focus a little bit more this time on what players did well than what mistakes I think were made. In part because I think the play was very good for all the players here, or their play was sort of limited by what their deck handed them. And also, I think I got some good constructive criticism in the comments. These replays I'm doing with open hands for both players, so I have a lot of advantages that these players don't have, where I get to see all of the information and know exactly what the optimal runs would be. So when you're looking at these replays, and when I'm looking at these replays, it's important to remember we have more information than either player did, and it helps us make some extra decisions and make some of the plays that look bad to our eye make a lot more sense. So hopefully I capture that a little bit better with this set. But without further ado, let's go into game one. So Jackmade's CTM list, which you can see up on screen, is a lot about using MCA Austerity Project and then CTM's sort of standard asset spam plan to build up value over the runner. So you take a 3-click turn, then ideally taking 3 the same action with Jeeves, and then click MCA Austerity, and so you get to take a 4-click turn, the runner gets to take a 3-click turn, and if they try to disrupt that plan, they take tags, they go into a place where they can't get untagged, and you exchange of information out agendas that they've stolen from you, and use psychographics to score out a big Beal, essentially to win the game. Some important things to note that come relevant in this game: all of the ice, with the exception of Toll Booth, are sort of soft and the runs in that you can break through them with no breaker, but you can get through them if you have enough money. Endless Eula, IP Block, Macrophage, and White Space all have credit checks on them, and then F2P doesn't end the run at all, it just returns cards to the hand. And it uses Amani Sinai to help pressure runners by resetting their board state anytime they try and get forward momentum and steal agendas. When we look at Chris Ferg's Tau Salonga deck, it is an Apocalypse Tau. So it's all about blowing up the entire board state, which is something that's a fantastic when you're up against CTM. Unfortunately, it's less good when the corp is on MCA. However, this Tau deck actually has no click cheating abilities except Beth to get a 5th click. So then with MCA would be a 4th click. So Chris will probably at some point will want to try and get that down so that he can APOC through a MCA Austerity. But it's nice for Chris to know his deck is about destroying board states. CTM doesn't have ways to suddenly win. The NWE's CTM can't win off of tags instantly with Boom. It has to use those tags to accumulate a little bit more value. So he'll have time when he can go tag me and do even further, do even more damage. As I said in the intro, I'm going to try jumping around a little bit instead of just clicking through everything in the game. If you liked me clicking through, apologies, just leave a comment and I'll try and find some other thing. But essentially my I'm going to sort of slide quickly, so the end of Corp's turn 1, they've installed 3 assets. The runner just builds their board state at the end of turn 1. Turn 2, we now see a little bit more build out. And so we see the MCA clicked. And here that point about ice being all cheatable with credits becomes relevant, because Chris is able to say, well, the only ice that can hard end the run here is Toll Booth. And I know this because I know the list. Some CTMs are on ping, which makes this play that Chris is about to do a little bit worse, but because it's an open decklist event, he's able to just click 1. Click 1 is this click. He just overclocks server 4 immediately. He figures this is the best time he'll have to go and get at this remote, because it's the least defended it will probably be, and at the least tempo cost he'll have. His board state is sort of doesn't matter that much, and he has a very nice money lead on CTM, so it's a good time to potentially dip low on credits. So Jackmate goes to 0, the rest of the white space, which is going to drain 3 from Chris, but not stop him because he's got 7 credits. So he's credit perfect on getting through the white space. And then Chris can use the overclock credits to trash MCA and pay into the CTM trace. So that's the very kind of nice play. And then what happens for a while, so Chris just takes a check because why not, basically, and getting some information about what's actually in the corpse hand is really nice in a board state where they're just kind of spamming cards out onto the board. And then just take some credits to be nice and safe. I think 6 credits is like exactly the right number to be able to match a hard-hitting news. And so for the next couple of turns, right, the corp is just going to be spend time clicking back for credits. The runner, Chris, is just going to keep drawing. He's going to keep building up his board state, getting economy down. He doesn't make a single run again until turn 6 because the corp hasn't put down any new cards that pose a threat. The corp is like, put down some ice, put down some more stuff, but then on this turn, Jackmate installs an installs 2 protecting HQ in server 4 and server 6, and then advances in server 4. So because again Chris Frigg knows the list, there's no advanceable non-agendas in Jackmate's list. So this is saying this is an agenda. Chris, interestingly, I think to me, chooses to sell the Mayfly. It's actually cheaper to break the white space for 2 credits than it is to lose 3 credits to walk through it. But basically, Chris decides, so the worst case is that server 6 isn't probably something like an Imani Sinai, which it is. And with these 3 cards, Aesop's has paid for itself and is a pretty low pain bounce, painless bounce, I guess, because it only costs 1 to reinstall. Beth is pretty similar, then it's 2. And Daily Cast has already achieved the value where it's a click for a credit. So reinstalling it is basically like you've just installed a Daily Cast all over again. So none of these cards getting bounced is bad for Chris. So he just draws. Yep. He's a card he likes. And then overclocks in. He does the overclock in case this is a Bologna. One of the reasons tells this might be a Bologna is if it's not a Bologna, there'd be no reason to advance it because Jeeves can score any of the other agendas in the stack off the board. And so the overclock is the Bologna. Potentially, Jackmate could be bluffing here with one of the non-5-3 agendas to try and bait out a play like this. And I'm not going to talk a bunch about Jackmate's play in this game, mostly because I think, once again, he took reasonable lines, but his deck didn't give him a lot of outs here. It's sort of one of the challenges with this deck. If it loses the MCA, it loses basically all of its momentum and ability to force the runner to make bad decisions. And Chris basically makes a bunch of right decisions continuously for the whole game. So he then lets him on his knife bounce his trace and clicks for 2 credits and discards Ngolo because he's probably not going to need to install a breaker the entire game. We see Jackmate click for credits and then play a hard-hitting news. And I'm not sure exactly why Jackmate pays 2 into this. I guess basically to make it cost similarly to Chris spending a whole turn just clearing tags himself. And so, you're trading credit even with the runner by doing this. So Chris drops pays into the trace. I guess another thing for Jackmate is going below 4 credits means he turns off Beth, Kilrain, Chang, and that's actually probably one of the major reasons it was done. Now that I think about it a little bit more. And so the board once again sort of stalls out as both players recover. We get to turn 9. So on turn 8, I think we draw Chris. Yeah, on turn 8, Chris draws the APOC. So on turn 8, Chris has the APOC and decides this is the time to go for it. There's a nice built-up board. There's 3 ice in the deck. or 3 of the deck's ice out of 10 is on the board. There's a Jeeves, there's a Spin Doctor, Armani, DBS, Maryland. Like, these are all reasonably good value targets. Chris is on 18 credits. He's got plenty of tools to reset and keep going. So this is why Compile is in this list, and actually part of SMC isn't, is Compile's 2 cost. It'll let you throw the Angolo from the heap into play, challenge the ice, and then bounce off. Jackmade, I think, makes a very reasonable call of not resing the toll booth. He could res the toll booth, but Chris will still get the APOC off in that case. And after that, Jackmade basically loses all of his ability to recover because he'll have 2 credits. Chris will have, let's see, it's 2, 3 to break the toll booth, -6, and then minus another 3 for playing the Apocalypse. So 7 credits, and might most likely have a much stronger recovery than Jackmade will, because Shaper has a lot of kind of, I call it bounce back econ, because you can play it from low credits and get a lot of value. So the Creative Commission, for example, Aesop's is bounce back econ in this sort of situation as well. Here, Jackmade res is free to play. I think this is mostly just to land the tag. The return to hand is almost actually negative value here. There's maybe an argument you could make that oh no, sorry, F2P is the corpse uses, so yeah, he chose the right thing. You don't want to return Aesop's here. Right, so now Jackmade has to rebuild. Reinstalls the Jeeves. It's nice because if the runner spends the time checking it, they're not going to trash it. It's just too expensive and not high enough value. Protecting R&D. Macrophage is basically is for R&D against Shaper, assuming they're going to conduit you down. And you know, Jackmade didn't go wide, and I think in part that's because he has a very narrow wing. It's hard for him to punish. His 2 hard-hitting newses are already in the bin. Chris Ferg knows the list, so he knows basically there's no more hard-hitting news that can hurt him, so he can check every remote with impunity just to make sure he doesn't lose to Rashidas and agendas on the table. Again, because there's no threats, he just clears tags, so that's not even really a concern, and sets up to keep going. And one of the things against CTM is you don't actually have to clear all their stuff. Most of their assets that really win them the game have to be rezzed and generate value for a while. So even though Chris is going to let a Rashida go, I think... Oh no, he actually gets the Rashida. But he left this Jeeves if it was a Rashida. In part, that's because he's a very good player and knows that Jackman is a good player, knows that's probably not a Rashida. And also, the one Rashida isn't going to win Jackmade the game. A bad run could cost Chris Ferg a lot. And now we see Chris lands on 3 tags after this turn, so he saw that Jackmade was trying to build a board and just says, well, let's see what information I get from poking around. Gets a Rashida, gets a Tomorrow's Headline, ran through a free to play, so lands on 3 tags, and is probably going to be tag me for the rest of the game. Jackmade continues to build up R&D very strongly, basically saying, well, eventually I'll get this DBS down, and I'll never have agendas in HQ. I'm just going to filter them onto the bottom of R&D. And here we see Chris do something we haven't seen done against any of the NBN decks yet. But that's just because of sort of how the board states have worked out. And one of the key things to do against CTM, if you're in a good spot, is to trash their econ. And so here, yes, Jeeves is an econ card. It's pretty slow. Mumbad Temple is a pretty good econ card for CTM. So Chris is going to say, I have an economic lead. I have a better way to recover from an economic deficit. I'm going to start trashing your economic assets to put that pressure lever on you, and then use that to win the rest of the game. It also means that there's literally no ice that can be rezzed here. Whereas if you didn't trash the Mumbai Temple, that ice could be rezzed. Trash the Rashida, fix HQ, and just takes a little bit of incremental value. And we're going to see, both players basically click for credits and what value they can get for the rest of the game. And we see the DBS's res to try and just put every agenda drawn on the bottom of R&D while CTM rebuilds to try and win later. And the runner is going to just draw for tools and money because there's no pressure on Chris to actually do anything here. He can basically click for 4 credits, let CTM click for 4 credits, and eventually he'll just win because CTM will deck itself and has no real plan to score agendas out anymore. Or at least not for quite a while. The MCA is the plan for the Corp, and so Chris can wait till the MCA comes down to start presenting a threat. We'll do a little bit of running because he's very big economically here. Just wants to get some information now that the Corp has drawn 3 cards, and none of which were protected by DBS, so the chance of one of them being an agenda was much higher. Turns out there were none, but that doesn't make the play bad. He sees a card go in server 9, an ice go to protect it, and then sees that it's an MCA. I thought this was like an agenda bluff, but no. So Chris put it up, challenge it with an overclock, get through an IP block. So the like big downside to going tag me if you're Tau or Shaper in this case against this particular CTM list is the one of psychographics, the one of exchange of information, and the fact that the toll booths become a lot worse to handle. But got paperclip in the bin. Chris had plenty of money. And was able to just get in the remote and say, you can't actually stop me. Trashes the MCA after 1 click. And continues forward. Here, Jackmate gets the unlucky scenario where he drew 2 agendas, so he can't bottom one of them. And just says, well, my only play is empty out HQ. Hope that Chris doesn't check all of these servers because any of them could equally be the sandbox. The fact that this is behind ice is not particularly relevant. What we'll see is Chris just runs each remote to make sure nothing here matters. Comes to the IP block and hits Macrophage. Now, in theory, Jackmate could boost the trace to 5, but that's not even sufficient here. It would maybe be a way to bluff Chris. Maybe he could have boosted it 1 to bluff Chris that this was a Bologna in server 9. But I think it's a situation where Chris could still click for some credits and just go in again on a future turn. So it's just not particularly worth it for Jackmate, and Chris gets a very nice win. So the big things that Chris basically did this game was just sit back. He able to get a strong economic start, and then CTM was opposing, its early threat of MCA, he was able to handle. Then he said, well, up until the point where there's an MCA, I will only run when I want to, and when CTM is presenting something that's valuable for me to run, either in the idea that they have a lot of rezzed assets and ice, so I can Apocalypse to blow up their board, or they've drawn so many cards, there must be agendas in some places. It's worth checking to make sure that the board doesn't get completely out of control. So this was Chris's first game, and he knocks out Jackmate and moves on to his second game, So Chris Ferg is up against Lost Geek. Chris is playing a Rush Precision Design list. Lost Geek is on Apocalypse Loup. So this version of Apocalypse Loup has 1 out of the Ashes, 3 Apocalypses, 2 Career Fairs, and a Political Operative. So it's supposed to be pretty tacked for the process, in particular this PD. The Political Operative helps you bust the remote because they have to res their cards, and then there's a payability window where the Corp can use Political Operative to trash Anoretic Void, or Manic Skunkworks. The Out of the Ashes can help deal with MCAs, though there's not, in fact, an MCA in Chris Ferg's list. But it also just having that extra clip can be very valuable. And what we'll see is Chris Ferg, plays this deck aggressively and well, and is able to pilot out a very nice win. So, first turn, nothing remarkable for the corp. Install. The Rashida in server 1. I'm starting to come around more to the idea that you should probably run the server 1 just to get the ice rest. And then you can decide, especially if you have a tool like Botulus, what you want to do after you see that first ice res. And Lost Geek apparently agrees with me. I had forgotten this when starting up this replay. There's maybe a case you could make that Lost Geek could have installed the Botulus on the Hagen here. I think probably, so the reason he doesn't, now that I think about this for just an extra second, is to get some bin breakers going into the bin. The idea that I was thinking behind getting the Botulus installed is that you can then, next turn, you already have the remote broken because the Botulus will have two virus counters on it, and you force Chris to really invest more ice into it. But playing the I've had worse to get 2 breakers in the bin is probably better because you want to do that at some point. Again, this is like not a mistake, just I'm curious about this and kind of want to try playing it in some of my games. Is can you just install the Botulus and trade the Botulus for whatever is in server 1? Now, in this case, it would be super valuable. I wonder how valuable it is in the modal case, the most common case. I feel like in a lot of cases on turn 2, it will either be a defensive upgrade, an agenda, or a second Rashida, all of which seem pretty good. I think it's that said, if you hit like a Tranquility Grid or a Mana Guard when you're low on credits, those are both pretty bad hits, and then you've traded one card for a bunch of negative tempo, which I think is why it's not a mistake that Lost Geek didn't do it. But I think it's sort of an interesting line to think about and maybe explore if your hand's kind of slow like Lost Geek's is here, where he's got an end game card, one early game card, a card he doesn't need, and a card that's sort of and Lost Geek does the smart thing of just drawing. His goal is to get a full set of breakers out as quick as possible. Chris spends 2 seamlesses, gets 1 back because he wants the extra tempo, and ices up R&D because that's where all of his units are going to be coming from, and they're probably going to get slanted right into server 1 as soon as they're drawn. So you don't really need to protect HQ at this point in time. Lost Geek makes some runs and then prioritizes getting more draw so that he can see more of his deck. We see, I think, Lost Geek doing a great job of just forcing the corp to invest resources. This play feels weird to rebirth early because Lost Geek is giving up information here. He could just so the reason, again, I think the reason he does it is there's no chance on a Wildcat Strike here. He doesn't want to discard all of these, most of these cards, and he wants to do something more efficient than clicking for a credit and installing the daily. But that means he has Omar and a Botulus Ice on archives that don't get used this turn. But Chris Ferg is in a great spot. 2 agendas scored on turn 5 is exactly where this deck wants to be. So here we see, unfortunately, it's the magnet on archive, so the Botulus does nothing. But at the end of the day, as Lost Geek, you're not that sad about that. You will be able to run through that later. I think somewhat unusually here, Chris Ferg lets Lost Geek draw. To me, this seems like a mistake because there's so many good cards, and Lost Geek is still looking for his paperclip. It's just hard for me to imagine that giving cards here is right in most cases. In practice, it turns out to be fantastic because Lost Geek basically draws nothing he wants. And here Lost Geek clicks for 2 credits, which makes a lot of sense if he's thinking about this game as only going 2 to 3 more turns. But I think, in retrospect, I get the benefit of hindsight and of backseat piloting. I'd be interested in maybe installing the daily casts and clicking for a credit, or installing the liberated and clicking for a credit. It's the issue with both of those is they are immediate tempo losses. It means he has less credits next turn and is less able to threaten an Apocalypse on his turn 6. But Apocalypse is always going to be pretty difficult to threaten because he needs basically 6 credits just to break the border control, another 6 credits to break the magnet, and then 3 more credits to play the Apocalypse. So it's not quite a credible threat yet. And so for that reason, I think maybe instead of clicking for the credits, putting down some of these economy cards and getting them ticking may have been marginally better. It's not a bad play. I think it's just I think the game, feeling like the game is basically completely over and trying to play for that, instead of to some extent saying, if the game doesn't end immediately, I am really going to need money. And there's nothing that's, while it feels like it's about to be immediately over, that doesn't actually necessarily mean it is. But Christopher continues to draw really hot, where, as PD in this board state, you want your agendas flowing off the top of R&D every turn, or every other turn, I guess, really, so that you can score. And that's exactly what he's getting. Lost Geek spends a bunch to get an R&D run, but doesn't actually have enough credits to do the Apocalypse here, which is a little bit weird to me. I feel like he could maybe, this is where you want to have the Liberated down so you can click down, and then next turn you'll be able to do this exact same play, because Chris is going to spend his whole turn presumably scoring server 1 or firing Arshida, and you can have the APOC land and do that. But Lost Geek is also playing around the idea that there's a double seamless and a 5-3 in here, which is a good thing to respect. In this case, it does not occur. And something I'm not calling out that Lost Geek is doing well here is trying to keep PD low on credits. That's obviously hard with so many credit gaining agendas. But up until, this is actually, Chris Ferg basically, in theory, wouldn't have had enough if this wasn't in advanced assembly lines. So Lost Geek is actually putting on good and effective economic pressure. Chris just has, is just skated by with a single credit to spare there, and then, balloons back up to 8 and is in a very nice spot. So I don't love these runs on R&D. Basically, the Corp 2 turns back, drew, and then installed in server 1. So they've drawn 2 cards since then, and also fired off a Gatekeeper. So if they had agendas that they wanted to score, they could have... I guess, so there could be maybe 1 agenda in HQ here if Chris was trying to save it to just keep scoring. And so that's why Lost Geeks makes these runs. And that's, I think I started as a critical thought, but that's sort of the explanation for the thought. It's very easy for me to say, oh, obviously there's no agendas in HQ. If there were, Chris would have installed them a few turns ago. But in reality, this board state's more complex than that. There's another thing about when you're playing these sorts of games is, do I play to steal the 1 and 6 that stops me from losing the game? Do I play on the assumption that they don't have the 1 and 6 and I should play instead for a longer term game to try and get my win condition off the ground? And it's a very hard thing to do. I don't think Lost Geeks did the wrong thing here. It's just a thing to think about, and it's a very hard calculation to make, and it's why I'm not one of the elite players. Is these sorts of calculations really matter a lot when you get to games. The one thing that's frustrating for Lost Geek is that he hasn't found a paperclip, which is maybe one of the reasons I don't like the runs on HQ quite as much is while it maybe stops you from losing immediately on that turn, it doesn't actually help you it doesn't stop you from losing on a consecutive turn because you still have not found your paperclip. So you haven't changed your odds of winning, I think, that much. Well, I could be wrong about this. So here we see the plan to trade a Botchless for a card, and unfortunately this time it's the Tranquility Home Grid, and that's sort of the downside to the play I talked about earlier of just trading the Botchless for an access on the remote. Chris takes some money, and here Lost Geek chooses to say, well, that is an agenda in server 1, presumably that's an ice on server 1 I can't break, and I already can't break the Hagen, so I'm really just drawing here to try and find answers. So here, Lost Geek is finally found his paperclip, and then clicks and installs a Liberated. To me, if you were willing to click and install it here, way back on turn 5, maybe that should have been the Liberated, and this Liberated could have been discarded, and then Lost Geek would have had more credits to threaten an Apocalypse earlier in the game, while Chris was sort of a little more fragile. As it stands, Rashida, Spin Doctor, there's going to be an agenda in there. Chris just goes for the slam dunk. Does a little bit of fixing of the board state. Doesn't install an ice that would stop him from being able to win the game. And at 6 credits, Lost Geek basically can't do anything. He's going to try and get an Apocalypse off, but it's just going to get stuffed. And here he just says, well, I have to hope that this is another NGO and you're just bluffing. But that calls the GG. And Chris Ferg gets 2 wins in a row. So they go on to the final against Herbert Klopstock. So we've already talked about Chris Ferg's Tau. Now I want to talk very quickly about Herbert Klopstock's sports deck. I still disagree with NWE that this is stronger than the Snare Bears sports deck, but I am very biased by having been crushed by the Snare Bears sports deck and not crushed by this deck because I've never played against it. But they're basically both on this idea that there's 12 agendas, but 6 points of them are effectively blank for the runner, and 3 of them are worth 2 extra points for the corp. So you're playing a game of 14 agendas for the runner and 23 agenda points for the corp, and you just have a lot of fast advance tools to go for the win. And we're going to see that this is a great deck to have against an Apocalypse meta that's about blowing up the board state. This Sportsmetal list just says, I don't have a board state, instead I'm just going to score. That said, it does build up a tiny bit of board with, Ice and Rashidas. And this is what, NWE argues makes theirs better, is that they're able to actually use Rashida to win the game. I'm a little skeptical of that just because Criminal is already running Boomerang Inside Job, or probably should be running Boomerang and Inside Job in fairly high counts. And there's no reason for them not to just Inside Job. And yes, there's there's a downside for them where they hit the Hyperloops. But if they do hit the Rashidas, because there's less fast advance in this Sportsmetal list, it seems more likely to brick, or that a regular deck could get ahead. That said, this deck is still going to be very, very favored against regular decks, sort of decks that are just money breakers and a splash of multi-access. The out here for Chris is probably get a big conduit dig and hope that you just win off of that conduit with dig before Sportsmetal can get enough pieces to fast advance a lot. And Rashida does help a lot with preventing that from happening. This deck is running 2 predictive pentagrams, 3 Rashidas, and 3 sprints, and 3 red level clearances, and 3 spin doctors. So all of these cards are draw, in addition to draw on the ID, and a bunch of those can also give money in different modes. And so that's sort of what we're going to see. There's actually not that much to say about this game. If you haven't seen this sort of deck before, it can be interesting to watch. Generally, you don't mind having early agendas stolen. This is 2 agendas, 3 points, pretty solid for sports. You could, in theory, fast advance this Hyperloop extension, because now every 3/2 in your deck, with the exception of Hyperloop extension, is 2 points. So you can just Biotic Labor, triple advance, and you can have that cost you only 2 credits, which is, maybe good enough. I think Herbert also takes a very reasonable line, just saying, let's just get money while I can. I can't think of a reason to click for a... So to me, clicking for a credit here is worse than playing Sprint or Predictive Planogram. Sprint is card neutral. You're drawing 3, shuffling 2, and discarding 1. So you add 1 card to your hand, lose 1 card from your hand to play it. And Predictive Planogram, he could have played for 3 credits. But I think he could have, and probably does have, a good reason to take a click there. Just sort of my thought on it. Chris is in the unfortunate situation where he does have to install a breaker, and this is, NWE's argument is that, oh, well, I make the runner actually spend money. Gets a Hyperloop, which he's pretty unhappy about. That just is more gas for Sportsmetal. So one option here for Herbert was to fast advance out the Biotic, but I think he didn't because Chris is on 0 credits, so he can be pretty safe if he just puts an extra piece of ice down on server 1 that he can score out the agenda. I think if there were not 2 overclocks in the bin, this play would be bad, but because there are 2 overclocks in the bin and Chris is at 0 credits, this is a perfectly safe play. Yeah, and if we're going to discard the planogram, here, it could have been credits at some point. So Christopher does draw the overclock, but doesn't make the run here because 5 credits is not enough to break Drafter. It's not enough to break Eli, and it's not enough to break Hagen. It's probably fine for IP block and obviously Magnet and Gatekeeper, which is what this happens to be. But the most ice permutations here on server 1 are too tough for even the single overclock here. So instead, Chris is going to build up some long-term econ, which makes a lot of sense, and Herbert gets on the board. So to me, this is a turn, yeah, and Herbert does. You just, the cool thing that red level does is it draws you 2 cards clicklessly, so it replaces itself, and then gets you a card, and then you can fast advance. Herbert takes some credits because he'll want some. Biotic Labor is fairly expensive, but he now has 2 more fast advance tools, and that's all he should need to close out the game. There's no trashing effects in this Tau, so he is very safe. I would say so safe to the point where I don't even know that you need to res the IP block. That's more likely to stretch your credits than it is to help your credits, but I guess it, arguably it's a good play just to tax the runner some more so that you can put Rashidas in server 1, and that's really the point behind it. I basically haven't been talking about Chris Ferg. He's been, I think, trying to get up in money because there is ice on the board. He now has money and is looking presumably for his conduit so that he can start trying to make a big dig on R&D and stay sort of up in money. Let's see. Yep, and then Herbert's just going to say, I'm going to keep fast advancing. I'm now 1 agenda away from winning the game. So it's all just about making sure I can get that down. Chris is going to check HQ just to try and deny an agenda that could be in there, or deny it off the top of R&D. So he knows he sort of has a turn, but red level says no, you don't. And so Herbert is just going to get the win here. He mistakenly sprints and then realizes, no, I actually have this. And that's the game. So Herbert takes it home for NWE. The score is 4-3. Chris gets 2 of the 3 points for the process with some very nice towel play, some very nice design play, but unfortunately fell just a little bit short against this very creative deck from NWE that's trying to beat all of the fair runners like 419 and Apocalypse. So I hope you enjoyed this little recap. This is almost certainly going up after I am joining Andre's stream, Andre of the Metropole Grid, streaming the final fight night of the Snare Bears versus NWE. I may end up doing replay reviews of that fight night and the other one, or I may not. I might go back to some of my more regular content of other stuff. I might do a little bit of exploring and sessions with the itinerant protesters. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed, and please like and subscribe.